I'm going to be recording the meeting just so in case there's any clients, survivors, or other community members or professionals who are unable to attend today and would like to view later. It will be on our YouTube video channel later on this week. And good afternoon. We're so happy for you all to be here with us and joining us. My name is Sarah Jones, and I'm a Resolve therapist. I'm joined by my lovely co-therapist, Amy Loblaw, today, and we're going to be talking about parallel parenting. First, we thought it might be really valuable to explore how survivors really kind of navigate a new area of control within entering into the legal and court systems. So divorce in New York State is an equitable distribution state, so meaning court considers all assets obtained during marriage to be split between ex-partners. We kind of explain it as New York State looks at a divorce like the splitting of a split business. And although New York is not a 50-50 joint custody state, joint custody is usually first proposed under this practice, and children can sometimes be seen almost as an extension of that asset. And that can obviously create a lot of challenges for survivors who don't feel safe with their abusive ex-partner having 50% of the custody of their children. And we can also see a lot of times courts, unfortunately, when it comes to custody, even rule in the favor of joint custody, kind of regardless of intimate partner violence, domestic violence experienced within the relationship or family setting, and at times kind of feeling like really minimizing or even invalidating concerns about the health and safety of children. And this can really create some re-traumatization and a whole new area of stress and even post-separation abuse for survivors while they're navigating these systems. And we've kind of seen, to give you guys some examples around custody and some of the issues that might come about are, say, someone who has an abusive ex-partner who maybe has really high narcissistic tendencies, and they're really focused in on winning, and they're going as hard as they can to try to get joint custody or maybe even attempt to get full custody. And their motives are in winning or causing harm to the survivor parent. And they hire really good representation, and they are able to really put on a show in front of the courts, and judges or other people within the system aren't able to see through it. Kind of extending a little bit more around how we see post-separation abuse play out after a survivor has exited a relationship and is going into navigating a parenting dynamic with their abusive ex-partner. We can see it in a few different ways. Kind of first around that legal abuse, right? So different tactics being used within the court system regarding divorce or custody, really utilizing character defamation tactics or utilizing some bits of manipulation and some bits of even gaslighting through the court and even through their representation. So at times it's not uncommon that an abusive partner will really hire someone who's willing to kind of be that like bulldog lawyer. We also see it play out through financial abuse. So this might mean withholding child support or spousal support. We also see it played out through maybe someone who is an ex-abusive partner isn't satisfied with the custody or the agreements that they have, and they kind of continue to bring that person back to court, and that costs a lot of money. We also see it in times being played out through counter-parenting. So an abusive ex-partner is really consumed with their want for revenge or retaliation, and that really compromises their judgment and the way that they're able to parent those shared children. We see it happen through DV by proxy, which is an abusive ex-partner really utilizing children and teens as an extension of abuse. So they may be saying messages, giving misinformation, even at times trying to impact a child's behavior or set up a situation where a survivor parent is going to be really triggered or even traumatized by some of the behavior of the child. We also are going to see that happen through the possibility of neglectful or abusive parenting. So a lot of times survivors obviously are parents who are really committed to the health and safety of their children, and they prioritize that, and that can be an area of vulnerability once there's been a separation and once the exposure to the survivor parent has reduced because they're no longer in that intimate relationship. We see it through discarding. So kind of touching back to the example I gave when we were exploring court, right, a healthy the abusive parent may really go for all of these, for 50-50 custody or full custody or all these different things that they want, and under the premise of trying to win in court and have that satisfaction of hurting their survivor, their ex-partner who's the survivor parent, and then kind of once that's won, kind of really not caring and really not honoring the children or even prioritizing them. We can also see it play out through isolation. So there might be kind of this character defamation campaign against the survivor parent, and an abusive partner might really target family, friends, different systems of support to really isolate them and give them extra challenges in trying to navigate advocating for them and their children within the court system. And then we also see it through harassment and stalking. So this could be covert, it could be even overt ways where someone might be surveilling someone else through actually showing up to their house, driving past their house, going through their garbage, heard some instances, or even trying to kind of keep tabs on them through, at times, even their children.
Hey, Sarah. Can I pause you just for a second before you move on? We got some feedback that the sound is a little bit tricky, and your sound machine on in your office, if that might help a little bit to turn that up. Okay, thank you.
It is me. Sorry, everyone. Yes, this is my sound machine. Sorry about that. Kind of picking up where we left off. So different parenting approaches post-separation. So commonly when we connect with folks, it's maybe the first time they're really hearing parallel parenting, and they might have heard a lot about co-parenting. So to kind of explore what's the difference between the two of these, co-parenting is going to really include a team approach to parenting where there's shared power and responsibility. Parents communicate respectfully, freely, and effectively regarding decisions for the children. Boundaries around scheduling and communication may be more flexible or negotiable, and third-party involvement is not needed for safety concerns or mandated by courts. Informal changes to parenting plans or custody agreements can also be used as needed. So a lot of two people deciding to be on the same page together, really holding the same values and practices regarding parenting. And it usually really kind of is going to be dependent on like what was the dynamic of these two people while they were in that intimate partnership. And usually for folks where there was an unhealthy and definitely an abusive dynamic, it's going to be really hard to carry out effective and successful co-parenting. And then we have parallel parenting. So at times, a lot of folks who are survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence feel that parallel parenting offers them some more options that are within their locus of control. So a parenting situation where a survivor accepts limitations of ex-partner and creates the healthiest parenting situation for their children and them. Communication is minimal. It's going to be businesslike and focused very much only on the children. Boundaries around scheduling and communication are rigid and specific, and that third party may be involved for transfer of children or supervised visitation, depending on the safety concerns. And there's also going to be changes to custody agreements made via formal process. So again, boundaries are going to be really rigid and specific. And so kind of further exploring like why co-parenting and abuse don't mix. First being the power and control dynamics that were present within an abusive relationship aren't going to kind of just disappear once now those people are only navigating a parenting relationship. We know that actually the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is upwards of a year after exiting. And we know that most times through the exiting a relationship or the dissolving of a relationship, An abusive partner might want to escalate in a means to kind of feel that they still have power and control in different areas. And we know kind of exploring the post-separation abuse, a lot of that shifts right onto the children. So it's not going to be a dynamic. Co-parenting doesn't offer the boundaries and kind of the safety that parallel parenting offers. We know that there's a transition from a survivor parent going from being in an intimate partner relationship with this abusive partner and abusive ex-partner and parent, and that they're going to be then going into navigating courts and a parenting relationship, which is stressful. It's going to be, an escalated situation, and that also comes with really different changes for that dynamic. And if the dynamic was already unhealthy or abusive beforehand, it might again just really escalate into something that a survivor is not going to feel co-parenting is efficient enough. An abusive ex-partner is also going to lack capacity to put children's needs before them. So a lot of survivors experience that while they're in the dynamic, and that's also going to continue afterwards. And if co-parenting requires both people to be on the same page right from the get-go, what a survivor parent wants and what an abusive parent wants are going to be kind of maybe worlds apart. There's also going to be a lack of empathy for how they're experienced, kind of thinking back to those areas around respectful communication, and being mindful and being thoughtful. That's not gonna, and empathetic, obviously, there's not gonna really be that, just as it was experienced in the abusive dynamic post-separation. And a survivor parent who's trying to navigate co-parenting might have increasingly re-exposure to abusive tactics and to trauma from trying to navigate being civil, per se, within a co-parenting relationship. And there's also ongoing safety concerns, possibly for the children and teens involved, and also possibly for the survivor involved. So kind of preparing for court. We can't stress this enough. Documentation is really essential, whether that be medical records, legal documents, police reports, safe communication, either via text, email, or audio with your ex-partner, documentation for mental and behavioral health supports, and reports from children's supports at school. Some considerations: if it's accessible to, really looking for representation that understands DV/IPV dynamics. So asking representation, what is the success rate previously with supporting and representing survivors? Like, tell me a little bit what you know about how power and control gets played out in a court system. Really trying to pick representation that feels aligned with your family's needs and the situation at hand. Connecting to supports inside and outside of the court. So whether that's court advocates, whether that's representation that really understands these dynamics, whether that's therapeutic supports or support groups, it's really stressful. And you are not alone in kind of gathering who can be safe, who are safe people and where are safe places to go and talk and receive that support. Additional areas within the custody agreement that can be kind of proposed first within like defaults that definitely may not work for someone where who's experienced abuse with this partner, or their children have been exposed to different abuse dynamics. Some that are really vital to pay attention to would be the percentage of custody. Has your ex-partner really, what's been the active role that they played in your child's life? If all of the parenting responsibilities have fallen on you, it might not make sense for there to be that 50-50 custody, and really trying to use some documentation to help prove that. We're also thinking about residency. A lot of times survivor parents are going to want to apply for residency for their children and teens. Joint versus final decision-making power. At times there can be joint custody, but one parent can also have that final decision-making power, which can be really helpful when we're thinking about parallel parenting between an abusive ex-partner and a survivor parent. Also thinking about visitation. Is there going to be supervised or not supervised visits? Are there going to be overnight visits or not overnight visits? What is scheduling going to look like? Considerations around safety measures for the exchange of children, communication boundaries and methods. And all of this can really be customized into the custody agreement, excuse me, and can be really vital for a survivor. Again, documentation really can be paramount in supporting requests for alternative plans to keep yourself and your children safe. So the case of parental alienation. Parental alienation syndrome has been debunked and is not considered a disorder in the DSM-5, but parental alienation as a tactic of abuse can definitely be played out by an abusive partner, and us at Resolve can see that in a few different ways. So at times within the legal system, an abusive partner may accuse the survivor parent of alienation of children, and this can a lot of times be based on that abusive ex-partner parent's actions towards children, towards the family, and children and teens may decide that they want to take a step back from that relationship based on their own emotions and anxieties or fears. And at times an abusive ex-partner might try to claim that the survivor parent is alienating them instead of being able to kind of see it from a perspective of taking on responsibility for why there might be some distance there in that relationship. And then also an abusive partner's actions can target the survivor parent into becoming alienated. So we a lot of times see parental alienation be kind of played out with the abusive partner, ex-partner and parent vilifying the survivor parent to the child or teen, and ways of really targeting their trust and their relationship as it stands through manipulation, through criticism, and through other actions that really make the child or teen feel like the survivor parent maybe doesn't have their best interests at hand or doesn't understand them, or even at times doesn't love them. And so busting some common myths. Children aren't aware of abuse or violence. We know that even when there is not direct exposure, that children are very much, and teens are very much aware of what's kind of going on in their environment and what's happening between their primary attachments with their parents and kind of what that dynamic is like between their parents. And we know that it can very much have emotional impact on them through stress levels, through experiencing anxiety or fear. And if children are not directly exposed to violence, there isn't an impact on them. So kind of going back to debunking kind of that first piece of just because there's not direct exposure, whether that's visual or auditory, that there's not going to be primary trauma there. Teens growing up in a home where there is domestic violence are going to be experiencing primary trauma through having a parent who's experiencing abuse dynamics based on the other parent or another partner who is living in that home with them. And kind of going off that. So does visual and auditory exposure have less impact to children than experiencing direct harm? And studies show that actually the impact of direct abuse and the impact of witnessing abuse have very parallel impacts on children and teens. And last but not least, experiencing parents divorcing is equally or more traumatic than witnessing or experiencing domestic violence in their home. It's a really common myth that sometimes we can hear from people that we know, divorce obviously can be an adverse childhood experience. And there might be a lot of reasons for why a parent is feeling like those might be equal, but we know that the impact of navigating a home situation where there is domestic violence is going to have the possibility of more traumatic experiences and impact on children and teens. And the way that I like to kind of use this analogy is thinking about children and teen living at home with both a survivor parent and their abusive parent in one unit. It's kind of like living in Seattle. There's going to be a lot of rain, and there's kind of ongoing storms. And because of the exposure, there really might not be time to prepare for that, versus when time is split between a survivor parent and an ex-abusive partner. It's like living in Rochester, right? Like it's going to be a little bit raining because that person's still going to have exposure. But in the time that that child and teen is with their survivor parent, they're able to feel safe, they're able to feel connected and loved, and they're able to like utilize some different skills and build them in feeling safe with their parent who is a primary attachment, who's not causing harm. And this is kind of like the process of taking a small one, if you can see the picture on there, and putting a nice rain jacket on and some rain boots and an umbrella, even goggles, right? So that there's still some exposure to this wetness and possible storm, but that they got some good gear on to kind of protect them and be able to be resilient and persevere. Some possible effects of domestic violence on children. Just to point this out for anyone who is still navigating their parenting situation within the relationship, or for those who have exited, just to be aware of. And we have them broken down from age birth to 5, and then also age 6 to 11, and age 12 to 18. Give that a minute to look at. So some possible impacts of post-separation abuse. Children feel loyalty binds. Children are at their core wanting to have a relationship with both parents, and based on some of the different abusive tactics or behaviors of the abusive ex-partner, they might feel really pulled. So being able to send messaging to your child that there is no choice, in regards to them wanting to have a connection with their parent, does not mean that that stops your connection and love being offered to them. Children are elevated to parentified status. So at times where there might be other children in the home and you have a teenager, especially it's very common with teenagers who are female, that they're going to be kind of put on or put into this position of being the parent to the other children in the home. And children become spies. So at times, especially for really little ones, they can kind of experience being almost interrogated by the ex-abusive partner around kind of what's going on in the home with the survivor parent, and really kind of, again, like that being that extension of abuse and control. And children can also become weaponized, as we discussed a little bit earlier within that post-separation abuse. And inappropriate adult information is shared. So a lot of times, kind of going back into some of that loyalty binds, an abusive ex-partner might share a lot of detail that might not be age appropriate, that might not be appropriate, regardless of age, to children, to teens, as a way to isolate or alienate the other parent, or as a way to just create conflict. Children can become direct victims of abuse, maltreatment, or neglect. So as we said, again, that with knowing that children and teens are so important to survivor parents, they're unfortunately become this vulnerability to the ex-abuser, and the ex-abuser might have more exposure or access to children and teens than the survivor at the time. I'm going to be kicking it off to Amy.
Thanks, Sarah. So a big question that we often get is, how do I help my children? How do I, knowing that they've been exposed to violence in our home or abuse in our home, that they have this ongoing relationship with a parent that I don't necessarily trust, and I'm not necessarily comfortable with their exposure. How do I help them? So the first thing that we always like to emphasize is that as the survivor parent, the safe parent, the non-offending parent, you are incredibly impactful and important. many times when you've been in an abusive relationship and you realize how much impact your abusive partner has had on your own life and your own mental health and your own choices, it can feel like they have much more influence than you do. But what research shows is that the primary attachment figure, the safe, emotionally supportive parent, actually has a lot more impact and influence over a child's resiliency and well-being. And one of the main factors of resiliency in children, particularly children who've experienced trauma, is a caregiver who has good psychological health, is emotionally and physically accessible, and has sensitivity to a child's emotional needs. And the research has shown that children really just need one adult with these qualities in their lives to have much better outcomes after surviving trauma. So never underestimate your importance in your child's life. As such, there's a lot that is needed for the child to develop, to continue to grow healthy, to heal from what they've experienced. And so some of the things that we talk about is it's important to shift from the role of protector to guide with your child. While you're still in the abusive relationship, oftentimes your role is about trying to manage your partner's behavior and trying to interject yourself between your child and your partner. And so once you have separated and this child or children may be going to visit your ex without your present, they need to learn their own skills for survival. And so this is a really uncomfortable shift for most parents to make. And we all naturally have to do this in parenting as we send our kids to school, as we send our kids to other children's homes to play or to hang out. We're not around them all the time. So we have to start to teach them their own skills, their own ways of discerning safety, their own ways to make good, healthy choices for themselves. And part of how we teach that is by role modeling, by giving them healthy limits and boundaries within our parallel relationship. So we only have control over what happens within our own home, within our own relationship with our children. And so even if you have an ex-partner who isn't really demonstrating good, healthy boundaries and limits with the kids, that doesn't mean that you can't, and that it's not important and impactful and critical to their healing and safety. One of the biggest kind of lasting, lingering effects for kids when they've experienced trauma is fears around predictability. So predictability and safety really help facilitate healing. And when you have clear boundaries that don't change and you repeat those limits and you're consistent with those limits, you're teaching your kids that life is predictable. You're teaching your kids that your home is a safe home and they can know what to expect. And kids can't often be curious and adventurous and learn if they don't have that fundamental safety and security. Your role is also going to be about bearing witness to your children's experience. So they need a place to process and express sometimes what has happened at their other parent's home, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And this is really hard because you're going to have your own emotional response to what your children are telling you, but they really do need a safe place to be able to talk about what's going on. And we often recommend considering connecting with a child therapist who has some experience with IPV and domestic violence, who can also be a witness and a support for your children. So in thinking about setting boundaries with your own children, it's really hard. Kids can't really tolerate rejection or abandonment within their relationships with their parents. And so sometimes their way of managing and navigating both relationships, particularly if the relationship with your ex-partner is potentially unhealthy or sometimes unsafe, is that they may develop a set of survival skills that are really critical but maladaptive. And so as the safe parent, recognizing what happened that caused your child to develop those strategies and skills and why they may be important in other settings, and also reinforcing the idea that those survival skills are not needed in your home. So this parenting approach of compassion and understanding, while also being really clear and firm about what's okay and what's not okay in your home and within your relationship. We see that children often exhibit their worst behaviors with their safest parent. There's often an experience when they're with the other parent of having to hold it in, so to speak. So being on their best behavior, maybe not expressing emotions or needs, maybe having to care for younger children, that their siblings or step siblings or other people's kids in the home. Being in really inappropriate or parentified situations. And so when they finally come home to your house after a weekend, after a week, they've held it in a long time, and there's often a meltdown or an explosion, unfortunately. And so preparing for that as the parent and expecting it can help you do your own self-care and kind of be prepared to experience that, to create safe space. Depending on the age of the child, sometimes kids need some sort of transitional ritual to kind of help them transition into the other home and sort of remember that this is a safe and predictable place. We always do the same things when we get home. We put our suitcase away and we unpack our pillow, and then we sit on the bed and we read a book together, something like that. And so it's a silver lining in the way if your child is having those detox moments with you, because it's kind of a good indicator that they feel really safe with you. They know they're not going to be harmed or abused or judged for showing you their maybe not prettiest feelings. The other thing that can come up often is that sometimes we'll hear kids or see kids mimicking some very triggering statements, words, actions that they have witnessed with their abusive partner or their abusive parent. And so when you have a 12-year-old son who's calling you the same names that your abusive partner called you, that can be really triggering in the moment. And a lot of parents will begin to fear, oh my gosh, my child is going to become an abuser as well. They're going to be abusive to me. And so it's really important in those moments, and seeking out support, of course, but kind of recognizing developmentally that kids are going to be testing out power and control that's different than the power and control dynamics in an abusive relationship. Part of the developmental milestones of adolescence is to develop identity and autonomy and be able to push back a little bit on rules to figure out what's okay with them. And so they may challenge and they may test things out to see what your response is and if they can get an effective, if it's effective at getting their needs met. And so again, being clear about where your boundaries are, that it's not acceptable to call mom those names, or it's not acceptable to say those things to dad, or whatever the situation might be, but clarifying what the boundaries are within your home. So it looks like we skipped back a little bit.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone.
So we have to go ahead one more, please.
Perfect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about that, everyone.
That's okay. So as I was just mentioning, sometimes parents are really fearful that because of exposure to abuse, that their child might be more likely to grow up as, vulnerable to being in an abusive relationship or vulnerable to becoming an abusive partner. And so we talk with parents about how to help your child develop healthy relationship skills and strategies, how to identify and build healthy boundaries, which is both are protective factors in having healthy relationships in either direction moving forward. So empathy is a really critical component. We know that part of the profile of abusive personality is that there's deficiency in empathy. And so as much as you can, be talking with kids about how other people feel, whether it's in a book that you're reading together, a movie or a TV show that you're watching together. Ask them questions. How do you think that situation made that character feel? How can you tell? So all of that empathy development is going to help them be much more in tune with their own emotions as well as emotions of other people, and then therefore less likely to be harmful. Boundaries are reciprocal, right? So we definitely want to teach kids to learn about what's okay with them, what's not okay with them in regards to their bodies, in regards to their time, in regards to how people are talking to them. We also want to teach them to respect other people's boundaries. So when people are setting boundaries with them, that the way that we show people that we care about them is to respect their boundaries. And if they say that they're not ready to play yet, that's okay. And we're going to give them space, and maybe they'll be ready to play later. But they're giving us clear communication, and we need to respect that. And these are great discussions to have, but kids learn best by witnessing and what we have modeled. So the more that in our own lives, we are showing how to set healthy boundaries, both with our children and with other people around us, that they're going to learn by example. And so, that's often a place where there's some need for healing. That's actually part of our survivor transition program treatment here at Resolve when we're working with survivors, is really working on how to have healthy boundaries moving forward. Okay. So we get a lot of questions about how do I talk with my kids about the abuse that has occurred? And kind of the theme of many of these slides here is you're going to be walking a little bit of a tightrope. There is an art form to all of these discussions. And this one in particular teeters between being honest without villainizing the other parent or sharing too much information. So really thinking about what is developmentally appropriate to talk about with your child, how much information is actually needed. If the relationship finally ended due to infidelity, for example. I have a client where the kids were aware that dad had cheated. And some of the kids were so young that they thought that meant that he cheated on board games. And that's why the relationship had ended. So that wasn't really a developmentally appropriate term to use for those kids, and maybe unnecessary for them to be aware of at that point anyway. But really being thoughtful about how much information is being shared, what kids really understand about what you're sharing, so that they can get a sense of what happened. And sometimes the best approach to having some of these conversations is by sort of bringing in the opposite of what you would expect. So for example, instead of specifically talking about abuse, you could talk about healthy relationships, and kind of through a critical thinking process, help your kids to get there and fill in the blanks by themselves. So if they're asking about, why did mom leave? Why isn't mom living here anymore? You could say something about, well, in healthy marriages or in healthy relationships, partners are respectful to each other, partners are kind to each other, partners work together and, help each other out around the house. When we were together, what do you remember about that? Did that seem like that what was happening? And then the child can start to think about, oh, maybe mom wasn't always kind to dad, or maybe mom, she wasn't really around when he was cleaning the house, and so on and so forth. And so we don't always have to directly tell kids, but we want to give them good information about what the ideal is and have that be a contrast and have them kind of think through it. Similarly, Sarah mentioned how, sometimes children are given misinformation about the safe parent. And so you may have a child that comes back to you and says, dad said that you're stealing all the money and that's why we can't go on vacation because you're demanding all the money. And so, instead of defending yourself, there might be some conversation about, okay, so I hear that that was probably really hard for you to hear. What do you think about that? Based on the way that we live, does it seem like we have a lot of extra money? Does it seem like, based on what you know of me, does seem like something that I would do? So allowing them to kind of really think through and analyze what they're being told to come to their own conclusion. And this is a really helpful life skill in general, because what we know about life right now in particular is we get information from all different sources, and a lot of times it's not accurate. And so raising kids to be critical thinkers is not only helpful within the context of navigating this relationship with an abusive parent, but also the world in general. Next slide, please.
I just want to make sure, hold on 1 second. Sorry, everyone.
It's okay. So as part of this idea of shifting from protector to guide, what we know is that unfortunately, kids may have to keep themselves safe sometimes. There may be, depending on your particular situation, their experience with their parent, there may be times where, at best, maybe supervision isn't as vigilant as you might like it to be. And at worst, there may be direct abuse occurring. And so safety planning with kids and teens is really critical. How do they handle in an emergency? And you may not feel completely equipped to do this with your children, and that's okay. Definitely reach out to supports. Again, if your child has a therapist that can help with this process, you're certainly welcome to contact agencies like Resolve and Willow to help with determining safety plan. There's lots of online resources. We'll talk about that in a little while. But really kind of thinking through, based on your experience with your partner, what are some signs of escalation? What are some things that might demonstrate that things are getting tense, and how can they safely disengage from the situation? Where in the house can they go? Knowing the area where your partner lives. If they needed to get out of that home, how would they do that? And where should they go? Is there a neighbor that's trusted? Is there some sort of faith facility or center nearby within walking distance that they could safely get to for help? Is your child old enough that they have their own phone? If not, there are also some smartwatches, particularly for very young children, that can only contact the numbers that you program into them. So, maybe having a device like that. Also recognizing that the other partner may take those devices away once the child is in their home and they may not be accessible. And so if the child can tell you, I don't get to use my phone when I'm at my other parent's house. Okay, so where is there a home phone? Where would the nearest public phone be? How would they access safety if they needed to? And is there a code word that can be used? So maybe, maybe they get to FaceTime with you when they're at their other parent's house, but we know that it's really heavily monitored and they wouldn't be able to tell you if something was going on. So is there a code word like blueberries or something like that, where they could say, oh, I really hope we have blueberry pancakes when I get home, and you would know that means they're in danger and they need help. and talking about, where they can go. Also really reinforcing with them that this is not a secret, that they're allowed to talk to people about what's happening to be safe. And if it's not safe for them to talk to you, that there's other adults in their world that want to help them, people at school, their teachers, coaches, pastors, rabbis, neighbors, aunts, uncles, grandparents. So really helping them identify who would be the people that they could connect with. Next slide, please. And then boundaries with the abusive partner. So kind of going back to what Sarah was talking about around this idea of parallel parenting and communication. So again, this is another tightrope that survivors end up needing to walk. Unfortunately, once you are in a court system, until that court system is concluded, and that legal process can be pretty lengthy, survivors often describe this experience of feeling like they're under the microscope, that any decision that they could be making about their safety could be misconstrued. And so it is very stressful and so unfortunate. It's a flaw in the way that the system works right now. But some guidelines to kind of help you navigate that process. Walking this line, again, of not interrupting or preventing connection between the parent and your child, while also maintaining as much safety as you can. We know that abusive partners are going to take a mile if you give them an inch. So really stay rigid in a lot of ways, being consistent, being firm, referring back to your custody agreement, referring back to the visitation schedule. It's really, really common that a partner will want you to pick up earlier, drop off later, change location, things like that. And seems reasonable enough, right? Like, okay, I can be flexible, but then when it's your turn, they're not willing to be flexible. They go back to court and say, well, she kept dropping him off late and picking him up early, and she was in violation of the custody agreement. So being aware that things can be used against you and trying to stay as much as you can to sort of the letter of the law, so to speak, while also recognizing that safety always trumps the court agreement. And if you have a good lawyer, good representation, they are going to be able to make that argument for you in court, that there were really sound safety reasons that maybe you didn't drop off your children at the scheduled time because your partner was visibly intoxicated or something like that. And it is important, if your partner is violating the custody agreement, the visitation schedule, so on and so forth, that as much as you can, following through with bringing that back to the court's attention, that can help and make sure for sure that you're documenting it. Because as court progresses, as the legal process progresses, showing those patterns of behaviors can sometimes helpful in supporting your requests for making changes in the future. And thinking about, if you have an order of protection and somebody is breaking that order, violating that order, that you follow through with the court processes around that. Oftentimes in the course of an abusive relationship, one of the survival skills that gets developed is over-explaining, feeling like you need to defend, explain, justify all of your decisions. And often that can come from a place of, if this person could just understand why I'm doing this, then they'll agree with me. They'll have this light bulb moment and, we'll move through this argument and we'll be done. And unfortunately, that's not how abusive people work. They're not really interested in understanding. They're interested in getting their own needs met. And so trying to stay clear, concise when you're being questioned. Maybe it's time to end the conversation instead of feeling like you need to explain and defend and justify yourself to your ex-partner. Some resources in this process. One Mom's Battle is a website that has a lot of resources. It's written by a mom as she went through. She actually has a couple books out as well, as she went through the process of divorcing a narcissistic partner, lots of claims of parental alienation, so on and so forth, and just lots of the post-separation abuse tactics were being used. So if you're looking for additional resources, that's a great place to check out. There's some apps that can be helpful both in collecting evidence as well as documenting communication and helping to centralize communication. Our Family Wizard and Talking Parents and Co-Parenter, I think all three of them, I know for sure the first two, have some sort of function where it can detect the tone of the communication. So if there starts to be sort of aggressive, angry communication, it'll flag that. And so that can be really helpful in court in demonstrating, why some of these precautions might need to be in place. Next slide, please. So one kind of last piece here, I know we're getting close to the end of time, but sometimes situations, whether it's through court decisions, whether it's through the relationship between the child and parent, that there may be estrangement that occurs with the safe parent. So that might be, we see it a lot with teenagers, really aligning with the abusive parent for a period of time. And so we use the lighthouse analogy if you're experiencing this. And if you are experiencing this, I am so sorry, because this is one of the most painful things to experience. A child that you have been so close and so invested in trying to protect, who suddenly doesn't want to have anything to do with you, seemingly. So the lighthouse, if you think about children as ships that go out to sea and might weather storms, and we don't know how long those ships are going to be gone. We don't know when they're coming back. We know they will eventually. So the lighthouse offers a constant light, a constant beam of hope, a constant signal of I'm here for you whenever you're ready to come back. I love you. This hurts, but I understand that this is something you need to do, and you're always my child. It's unwavering, it's boundaried. The lighthouse is a pretty solidly built structure. And so, the ship can't come back and crash into the lighthouse. It's here, but it's solid and it's boundary. It's not going to give in. It's consistent. And the lighthouse always has a light keeper, so it needs to be taken care of. When you are going through this process, you need a lot of self-care, a lot of support. This is really, really painful. Which leads us into self-care, which is our next slide. So as you're potentially experiencing some of this post-separation abuse, trying to navigate parallel parenting, supporting your children's healing, the best thing you can do is take care of yourself. They need you to be really healthy, really strong. If you're not strong and healthy, it's going to be really hard to support their healing. So making sure you're connecting to supports, you're not alone. So if you have family, if you have friends, if you have formal supports, therapists, agencies like Resolve and Willow, making sure that you're utilizing those supports, letting people know what's going on, talking about what you're feeling. Recognizing what's within your control and not what's not within your control, and trying to bring your focus back to the choices that you can make and the power that you do have in the situation. Having space and time for self-expression. So, if you're a journaler, if you're an artist, if you're a singer, but even talking with a trusted friend about what's going on and how you're feeling, getting it out of your head and putting it outside can help it feel a little bit more manageable. Making sure you're attending to your very basic needs. This is one of the first things that we often talk to our clients about is, Are you sleeping? Are you eating on a regular basis, a wide variety of food? Are you drinking water? Are you moving your body? Are you making some social connections? So starting there, if you're not sure where to start, and really trying to take care of yourself. And thinking about reducing your exposure to trauma. So how you're setting boundaries with your ex, but also how are you setting boundaries with this whole legal process? I know lots of survivors that tell me that they're up till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to organize their documentation or put letters together. And that is going to impact your ability to be effective and present for your children. So, taking breaks, taking space, setting some limits around how much time you're going to spend on some of these things. Even thinking about like television and social media, if you're, watching like Law and Order all the time while you're in court, that might not be very helpful for you. That might be really triggering. If you're watching crime documentaries all the time or listening to podcasts, that might not be really helpful to you. So taking some breaks and being thoughtful about your exposure to trauma and triggering content. And giving yourself permission to have fun and enjoyable experiences. Sometimes when we see our children who are struggling, when we feel like we're struggling, for some reason, we think we're not allowed to have fun or give ourselves permission to have pleasant experiences in life until it's all over, until everybody's okay. And we know that in our own resiliency, we need to have those things to look forward to. We need to feel joy. We need to be able to feel connected to ourselves and recreating and reclaiming our identities. And so it's really important to give yourself permission for some of those activities. So just briefly, some community resources that provide some therapeutic supports for children and families, particularly that have experienced violence or trauma of types, really great resources in our community. And then Parenting Village has lots of just great parenting support, whether or not you have experienced trauma, and they have a lot of support circles with other parents. So sometimes when your child's experienced trauma, it can be hard to discern what's normal development, what's normal childhood behavior, and what is trauma response. So being with other parents of same age children can be really helpful in kind of navigating, oh, this is really typical for all kids this age versus, oh, this is problematic. So thanks for joining us today. We just have maybe 2 minutes for questions, but please feel free to reach out for us. This webinar will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel and also through our website, I believe, eventually. Please feel free to reach out to us, follow us on social media. If you ever have any questions, if you want to connect with one of us about parallel parenting or other topics, we're always happy to collaborate and consult. And I guess we will leave it up for some questions. So someone is asking if we can go back to the slide on the effects of different ages, possible effects of trauma on different ages in domestic violence. I also want to mention for our June workshop, we have some guest speakers. We have Ryan and Kaylin from Thrive Counseling, who are going to be presenting about some of the nuance and specifics of the LGBTQIA+ community and its intersection with intimate partner violence. And it coincides with Pride Month. So we're really excited to have them join us and welcome you all to come back and hear their presentation as well. And we will hang on for about 5 minutes here, just in case there's any other lingering questions, comments.
And I'm responding back to the person who asked us for the slide. So the PowerPoint, typically when we do when Resolve's hosting, we are able to send that PowerPoint out. So if you're interested in having a copy to be able to view later on with the recording or just view today, let me please know what your email address is, send it into the chat and we'll be able to get that out to you.
You can also always follow up with us at resolve-rock.org. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Thank you very much for kind feedback, folks. We appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for bearing witness to me being a little on tech savvy. My computer can be a little wild at times. Thank you to everyone who's sending in their email addresses. I will have those out to you later today. If for some reason you were unable to send it in, like Amy said, you can give the office a call or shoot us an email. We'll make sure that it gets for you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We're going to be ending today and we hope to see you in